Hello everyone, Tyler King here with a new review. Today I wanted to talk about the 7th studio album by German electronic band Kraftwerk, The ManMachine. The ManMachine, I believe, is Kraftwerk's finest album. It saw them diluting everything that they had done previously into a concise package of only 6 songs, 5 of which were released as singles, which to me is on the same level as something like Michael Jackson releasing almost every song from Thriller as a single. The ManMachine, if you haven't heard it, is, like most of Kraftwerk's albums, a very robotic, cold, atmospheric listen, but it's never to the point of being ambient or inaccessible or avant-garde in any way. What I mean when I say that it's cold is that it does lack a bit of humanity, a bit of warmth to it, because Kraftwerk really came and approached the instrumentation not only on this album, but one could argue really from, I would say, the album maybe Ralph and Florian onward, which was their 3rd album, from a very sterile sort of approach. So you don't get things like quote-unquote mistakes or things played possibly, maybe like a split second too early or a split second too late. Everything is very precise. Everything is where it is quote-unquote supposed to be. It is a very rigid, very robotic album, which is fitting because the very first song on the album is called The Robots.
We are the robots. We are the robots.
And the imagery that they would introduce on this album, I mean, first of all, look at that cover. That is just, that's an iconic album cover in its own right. Let me see if there are photos. Yeah. So they would take this concept. You can see the records falling out of the sleeve. So they would take this idea and this imagery of them being almost robot-like to, of course, its natural progression, where they wouldn't even do photo shoots. They would have these mannequins or robots that were constructed to look like them, and that is what you would have pictures taken of for the band members. Like I said, it is only 6 songs, but each one feels absolutely necessary. I know that I said this when I talked about the Yellow Magic Orchestra debut, but because you are limited to a certain amount of time on a vinyl record, I feel like every moment, every second needs to have some sort of purpose to it. And I don't know of a much better example than this album. Because yes, some of the songs do exceed the 6-minute mark, the 8-minute mark, but at least to me, it's never boring, and it never feels like it's too much. So for a song like Neon Lights, which is just over 9 minutes long, it's still one of the most beautiful songs in their entire catalog. The whole outro of it, I think, is just this amazing soundscape of glacial synthesizers just twinkling and tinkling. It's so majestic sounding. song like Spacelab, which, at least to what I can think, is the only time that their sort of science fiction-y, post-apocalyptic, sinister lyrics ever came from outside, meaning outer space. I, Spacelab is phenomenal, almost 6 minutes long, but again, every single second used to its advantage. And I don't think that there's a better example of the band's utilization of time and the necessity of it as on the title track. It is so, like I said, it's very mechanical, but it moves at such a brisk pace, and the way that each instrument and instrumental part is introduced as the song goes on, after you get the swell of the man, machine, 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 machine. It's such a, like, it gives me chills every time that I listen to that song. This is an album that I have sung the praises of, I think, ever since maybe 2008, 2009. That's about when I got introduced to Kraftwerk. I remember in 2009 in particular, I spent a couple months living in Washington State, and during that time, the only two people I listened to, such a weird juxtaposition, was Kraftwerk and Bob Dylan. And I remember Kraftwerk was a very early influence on me with making my own, at the time, electronic music. Particularly this album. And I know up until this point, they'd already made a few albums that really anyone could point at and say, this is the masterpiece. Autobahn, Radioactivity, Trans-Europe Express. But I think that this really is the culmination and the, like, just whittling down of everything that made the band great so far. And this is what you're left with. I mean, to me, this is the band's definitive statement, whether it's talking about, you know, them being robots, or their sort of awkward love song of The Model, or the long stretches of instrumentals on something like Metropolis, or Neon Lights, or Spacelab, or the sinister edge that a song like the ManMachine has. It all goes together so well, and it's almost seamless. I mean, this is such an album that you have to listen to from front to back. Maybe The Model can be listened to on its own. Obviously, that is, like, the big, like, quote-unquote single from the album. But just cherry-picking, especially an album with only 6 songs, I think does the work and the band an entire disservice. Listening to it in its entirety really puts you in this particular mood, which is really hard to put into words. It's not quite anxious. It's not quite inhuman. It's more introspective. And part of that, I'm sure, has to do with the mechanical nature of the instrumentation, the very cold, emotionless vocal delivery of, I believe it's Rolf Hutter who is singing the songs. It could be Florian Schneider. It's a masterwork. It's such a phenomenal album. And much like I said with that review I did of the Yellow Magic Orchestra self-titled debut, synth pop and electronic music as a whole would not be what it is without Kraftwerk. I think that the fact that it took them this long to get inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is an absolute fucking travesty. They're a band where I would argue that on a whole, or as a whole, they are more influential than the Beatles. I think that Kraftwerk is the single most influential band of all time. Their pioneering work with electronic instrumentation, pretty much creating the synth pop and electronic and techno genres. I mean, like, yes, just like Yellow Magic Orchestra, Kraftwerk was a huge influence on stuff like early Detroit techno. Africa Bambaataa credited them, as well as Yellow Magic Orchestra, with helping him to create some of his earliest hits. It's impossible to look at the trajectory of popular music throughout the second half of the 21st century without pointing at Kraftwerk. And I don't think that there's a better argument for that case than this particular album. Hey, this is Tyler editing the video. I meant to say second half of 20th century. I was just really passionate at the time, and I got my centuries wrong. Previous releases, Autobahn, besides the title track, the whole second part of it is very freeform, a bit inaccessible. About half of Radioactivity is sound effects. Trans-Europe Express even has a few moments on it that I think aren't fully necessary. But the ManMachine is an album where I could not decide a single song to take off of it. Because the entire thing is just this phenomenal single work of art that is more influential than I could put into words. I mean, as far as numerical goes, this to me is the definition of a perfect album. Easily a 10 out of 10. Not a single song, not a single moment, not a single note that feels like it is out of place. Everything is right where it belongs on this album and on these songs. And I will argue that until I am as blue in the face as my hair used to be in some of my older videos. Just all of the bands that, like all of the synth pop bands that you love, whether it's an older act like The Human League, or Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, or Gary Newman, or a more recent act like LCD Sound System, or Churches, none of those bands would be where they are, would be who they are, without Kraftwerk. And I think without the ManMachine. And those are my thoughts on the ManMachine by Kraftwerk. This is a review I've been wanting to do for a long time. I just didn't know how to come at it. Way back when I would still do the song-by-song breakdowns. This is one that I actually did go through and take notes of, so this was maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, but it just felt like such an impossible task. It's like, what do you say about this album that hasn't already been said by so many other people? And really the best way for me to talk about it, I think, is in this kind of free-form way. So thank you everybody for watching and listening to what I have to say about the ManMachine by Kraftwerk. What do you think? Do you love Kraftwerk? Do you hate Kraftwerk? Is this your favorite Kraftwerk album? Is this your least favorite Kraftwerk album? Please feel free to let me know in the comments below. Also, if you are enjoying the content that I'm putting up, I do have a recently launched Patreon page, which will also be in the description box below. For as little as $1 a month, you can get things such as early access to my review videos, exclusive reviews that go up every month, There's a monthly Q&A that I do that you'll be able to watch and submit your questions to. And if you do decide to become a patron of New Review, I just want to say thank you. You're keeping this channel growing, and you're keeping it going. Yeah. Until next time, I'm Tyler King with New Review. Keep listening to great music.